Welcome to this online lesson on the gold rush, lawlessness and vigilantes. Our aims are to know how settlers attempted to keep law and order, to explain how circumstances of migrants caused problems with law and order, and to evaluate the effectiveness of attempts to control law and order. A do now task then. This poster is an advertisement for a ship carrying gold prospectors to California. Why might people searching for gold cause law and order problems? Take some time to give that some thought and pause the video now. So what did we think? Well, one of the problems of gold prospectors is the fact that they're finding gold. Should you be one of the lucky few who actually finds gold, that makes you a target for thieves. If you're one of the unlucky many who doesn't find gold, you're going to have to support yourself in some way. Not only that, most of the gold prospectors were men and they lived in male-only communities. This could lead to drinking, gambling, violence and even problems with prostitution, as some women travelled there looking for some work of their own. Well, we're going to consider some key terms in a moment, and I'll just warn you there are quite a few this time because there are lots of specialist terms that relate to the idea of the gold rush, and we're going to have to get through those before we proceed any further. So today in Cloak's compendium of annoying old-fashioned words you need to know is mass migration, when lots of people move where they live. Mass settlement, when lots of people come to live in a particular area. Staking a claim, when someone makes a legal claim over a piece of land, often to dig for gold on it. Road agents, gangs of robbers who stole from travellers. A US Marshal, this is like a police officer in charge of a whole area. He worked for the federal government. This means that he works for a federal government rather than a state government, because often they were used in areas where there was no actual state yet, just a territory. Sheriff, an elected law official for an area in charge of making arrests and taking people to jail. Posse, a group of people called by a marshal or sheriff to help track down a criminal. Vigilantes, people who punish lawbreakers themselves rather than wait for the proper authorities. And lynching, the execution of someone usually by hanging but without using the official authorities, for example having a proper trial. Okay, quite a few key terms to get through then, but please record them and their meanings, and which key terms might be related. For example, how might lynching and vigilantes be related? Take some time to give that some thought and pause the video while you complete the tasks. Pause now. Alright, what have we come up with then? Well, let's do some links. Mass migration actually leads to mass settlement, and this often in turn leads to staking of a claim. However, when a road agent finds someone and takes all their gold or takes other things off them, the person will probably then make a complaint to either the US Marshal or a sheriff, who will then raise a posse to go and track them down. However, if there is no US Marshal or a sheriff in the area, they're likely to resort to vigilante justice instead, and often the result of that was a lynching. So there's lots of links to be had here, and they do all intertwine quite nicely. But let's find out a little bit more about the origins of the gold rush. This is the gold rush of 1849. Why have I put that symbol up there? Well, the San Francisco American football team is called the San Francisco 49ers, and that's named after the gold rush generation. San Francisco as a settlement first started to grow in an appreciable way as a result of the gold rush of 1849. So in 1846, the population of the west coast state of California, which by the way is pretty massive, was 8,000 people. That's only a little bit bigger than a small market town in England today. By 1850, it had grown to 120,000, but that's still pretty sparse. Then by 1855, it was 300,000. Again, this would have left entire areas with absolutely nobody in it, but it did mean that certain areas of California were now becoming very heavily populated, and they were doing so at a very fast rate. So why? It was all about the discovery of gold. That's right, prospectors were going there to pan for gold, mine for gold, and just find gold any way they could. So in 1849, gold was discovered in California. Strictly speaking, it was actually found in 1848, but it took about a year for that news to get back and for people to start making their way out there. People from the east, desperate to get rich quick, began flooding into California, and this became known as the gold rush. Your tasks then. Firstly, how much did California's population increase by? Describe why the population of California increased so quickly. Then look back at your key words. Why is the gold rush an example of mass migration? And then as an extension, what potential problems might this have caused? Pause the video now while you complete those tasks. Okay, well, let's do the maths here. So California's population was 8,000, and then by 1850, 4 years later, it had increased to 120,000. How might you work that out? Well, the way I'd do it is I'd take 8,000 off of 120,000, and what would that leave you? 112,000. So there's been an increase of 112,000 between 1846 and 1850. But then if we look, there's been a further increase of 180,000 between 1850 and 1855. So in total, what has been the increase? 392,000. That's a heck of a growth in population. So why did this population grow so quickly? Well, really, this was all about people seeking a get-rich-quick scheme. They were hoping to find some of that gold for themselves and then be able to make their fortune. But is this an example of mass migration? Well, yes, it absolutely is. Although California was still going to be very sparsely populated in some areas, other areas would become incredibly crowded very quickly, especially those areas where there was likely to be found gold. And so this is mass migration because this is a mass event of people moving to live in a certain area at a certain time, rather than a gradual growth. So what potential problems might this have caused? Well, there's a couple of things here. Firstly, the rapid growth of migration in this area meant that law enforcement agencies simply couldn't keep up. California was not a state either, so it was only a territory. Therefore, it only had the very basic coverage of law enforcement. And not only that, despite the fact that you had a real crowding in certain areas, California was still incredibly sparsely populated, which means that each of those official law enforcement agencies would have an incredibly large geographical area to try and control. And so for that reason, the gold prospectors tried to come up with a code of conduct of their own. It sometimes worked, it often didn't. So we're going to consider the life of the gold prospector now. What would be helpful is if you make a table like the one on the screen, with lifestyle and rights on one side and problems on the other. I just put this at the bottom of the screen so I can put the information on the screen for you to see more easily. However, you should give yourself plenty of space to write several bullet points under each one. Now, if you have a copy of the picture, you can stick that in the middle and then place the headings either side. If not, just make the table. Then add the examples below under the correct heading. And as an extension, given there were so many serious problems, explain why so many people still became prospectors. Here are the problems. Prospectors followed a California law about staking a claim so that everyone had a fair share of land to find gold in. Claim jumpers stole claims from other miners if it looked promising. Salting a claim, on the other hand, was where gold flakes would be sprinkled onto otherwise worthless land, which then would be sold to inexperienced prospectors who thought they were onto a good thing. Road agents robbed miners of their gold, even when they did find it. Prostitutes and gambling were common in male-dominated mining camps. Drunken fights could erupt between men fighting over the few women in town and over the few decent prospects for gold too. Prospectors were usually armed with guns to protect themselves. That was a bit of a recipe for trouble. Prospectors came from all over the country, and indeed all over the world. Cultural and racial differences were common. For example, there was quite a lot of Chinese immigration to the west coast of America. If you think about the geography of this sort of makes sense. If they crossed the Pacific Ocean, that's the first part of America that they'd find. However, there was a lot of racism between European ancestry settlers and those from China. Racial and cultural differences between prospectors could result, therefore, in fights. So, go through those different problems and list them under lifestyle and rights and problems. Pause the video while you complete that task. Okay, let's see what things you've come up with. Prospectors follow the California law about staking a claim is part of their lifestyle and rights. Claim jumpers, though, is a problem. Salting a claim is also a problem. Road agents robbing people, that's another problem. Prostitutes and gambling, well, much as they were problems, they were also part of the lifestyle of the gold prospectors. But drunken fights erupting is definitely a problem. Prospectors being armed with guns to protect themselves is part of their lifestyle. And prospectors coming from all over the world is also part of their lifestyle. But the racial and cultural differences causing problems, well, that is very much on the problem side of things. Alright, so now we've got a summary of the lifestyle of the gold prospectors and the problems that they encountered regularly. So let's consider what was done about this. Keeping law and order. Federal power versus local people. So the federal government, based on the East Coast, only had a very limited grasp over the law and order of places like California during the gold rush. So your tasks then. I've included two links. One has got some details about the life of the gold prospectors and why they moved west, and another has some more generalised details about the way that law and order was done in territories. Some of this specifically linked to the gold miners, but actually all of the information is useful. What you'll need to make notes of on is official authorities. These are federal attempts to keep law and order. We're talking the likes of sheriffs and US marshals here in particular. And then the use of vigilante justice. What was this? How was it that local people were trying to keep law and order? And why were they turning to vigilantes rather than the official authorities? Then, once you've got sufficient research and you've done enough reading, you can answer the following question. Which was more effective in keeping law and order in the gold rush mining communities? Was it the federal authorities or was it local people? Whatever your answer, use point example explain to explain your answer with examples. And then finally, as a challenge, balance your answer. Explain how the other side also kept law and order, but were not as effective as your choice. This is a skill known as evaluation. Pause the video now and you can move on when you're ready. Okay, given that parts 2 and 3 were very much based upon your opinions, I'm not going to give any feedback on those just for now. But hopefully we've recognised some of the problems that the official authorities had. Sheriffs were often corrupt, for one thing, and they relied on people voting them in as elected law officials in order to take on their role. Not only that, the US Marshals, who might be less open to corruption, often had to cover incredibly vast distances, so crimes were slow to be reported, slow to be investigated, and even slower for anything to be done about it. And by that point, usually it was all too late. Here's a final extension then. Explain how far you agree with this system, that this system of the law and order supports this rather mythical idea of the Wild West. Give that some thought, note down a few answers for it, and then we can move on. So pause the video now and press play when you're ready to move on to the next task. Okay, let's move on. I'm now going to demonstrate to you a sort of flowchart which shows how things can go wrong in these settlements. First of all, there's the issue of mass migration, and this is the gold rush itself. What that leads to is the following. The mass migration of the gold rush contributed to new crimes like claim jumping, social unrest as most prospectors failed, and unemployment. It also contributed to more crimes, theft, assault, murder, and a disorderly lifestyle, including mostly male communities, alcohol and prostitution. And also there was a problem of a new ethnic mix and the racism that Chinese migrants faced. This was made worse, though, by the slow response by the US government, poor funding of law and order by the government, the geography of the area, where huge areas for law officers had to be covered, and corruption and bribing of some law officers, making them completely ineffective. This was also made worse by the racist attitudes held by the people who lived there, and racist attitudes that led to racist laws and law enforcement. So the Chinese really did have a tough time. And as a result, this resulted in community laws and law enforcement via vigilance committees as people felt let down by the official processes. Now, what would be a good idea here would be to create your own version of the diagram which you can then use, because you're going to be writing a narrative account based upon this information. So first of all, make your own version of this diagram now. So pause the video. Alright, let's see how you might plan out one of these answers. I'm going to do one example for you. So, let's bear in mind the question first of all. Write a narrative account analysing how the mass migration of the gold rush led to the use of vigilantes. 8 marks. Now, one thing I should point out here is it is unlikely that the question will be phrased exactly like this in the exam. They're more likely to give you a general theme, but with quite a narrow date range. So I could have put on here between 1849 and 1855 or something like that, but I didn't think that was really helpful for this particular task. Now, I make no apology for doing lots of narrative account questions in these videos. These are the ones that consistently my students have struggled most with, and the only reason for it is probably because there's been a lack of practice and a lot of very simple misunderstandings with it. These are easy marks if you know how to get them. 4 of them are for your knowledge, 4 of them are for your explanation, but you must follow a few simple rules in order to get the marks. So to help you out with it, I'm going to give you some stimulus material, same as they would do in the exam. You may use the following: claim jumping, corruption, but you must also use information of your own. Remember that you may use those examples, and it makes sense to because they will be relevant, but you will not have to. You can still get full marks just on your own knowledge. So let's consider how you can get AO1 and AO2 marks like this. I've included the lower marks as well, so you can have a look at that, but I'm going to concentrate on level 3, 6 to 8 marks. You'll need a clear narrative with events in a clear chronological order. So if you have the effects after the causes in your answer, that simply won't work. So keep them in chronological order. The links between events will need to be fully explained and analysed. That is also AO2. Also, the outcome of events explained and backed up. That's also AO2, and it usually means that there's a brief conclusion at the end of the answer. But most of all, you will need accurate and relevant knowledge used throughout. And this should show good understanding. And you cannot get level 3 without including information of your own. So you'll be stuck down towards 5 marks if all you do is explain really well claim jumping and corruption. So bearing that in mind, let's have a look at how you might construct your answer using the diagram that you created earlier. So here's our continuum again. Mass migration of the gold rush contributed to new crimes like claim jumping, which was made worse by geography because of the huge areas for law officers to travel, resulting in community laws and law enforcement by vigilance committees. You could almost create your own version of this just by drawing a pencil line between different areas of your diagram. You're very nearly constructing a sentence by doing that. But here's how it might look in an exam-style full example paragraph. The mass migration of the gold rush of 1849 contributed to the occurrence of new crimes in California, such as claim jumping, where after a legal claim to prospect in an area had been made, another prospector moved in to find gold. This would often lead to further disorder. This was made worse by the geography of California. What few US marshals and sheriffs there were often heard about crimes too late to act on them because of the distances that needed to be covered to report crimes and respond to them. This resulted in local people taking the law into their own hands by setting up vigilance committees which could more quickly respond to crimes even if their judgments were not backed by the US government. So you can see what I've done here is I've taken the basic thread of the diagram at the top and I've fleshed it out with proper full sentences and more of my own knowledge. If you can create a couple of paragraphs like this and a substantiated conclusion, that should be enough to secure you the full 8 marks. So if you want to study this example in a little bit more detail, you can pause the video here, or you can continue playing and we'll have a go at creating our answer. Let's have a go at the answer then. Remember, I've included the grade descriptors up on the board as well, and remember the stimulus material. For an 8-mark answer, you should be spending anywhere between about 12 and 15 minutes on this, unless you're entitled to extra time in the exam, but only you will know that. So don't spend too long on it, and you may begin your answer now. So pause the video and press play when your answer is complete. Good luck! Alright, well, we'll have a look at a full example answer now, and I will have colour-coded it so you can see the different stages of my answer. Here's our first paragraph. This is one we looked at earlier, so I won't read it to you again. But what you'll notice is I've picked out one thing which basically represents the point that I'm making, the green bit, which is my demonstrative example, the blue, which is more of my further explanation and more own knowledge, and then the purple bit, which is my real link back to the analysis of the answer. Notice too I've picked out some of my linking sentences, or linking phrases rather, in bold and in capitals. Obviously that's not the correct way to write it, but it just helps pick it out so that you can see what I've done. Let's look at the second paragraph though, which you've not yet seen. Also, the mass migration of the gold rush contributed to more crimes, particularly theft, assault and murder. This was made worse by corruption of some law officials. These officials would take bribes from the rich and intimidating people associated with the gold rush, and therefore people complaining of having suffered from the effects of crime would get no help. This resulted in vigilante justice, where people couldn't trust federal law officials to provide them with justice. They were more likely to take the law into their own hands by lynching accused criminals, for example. Now my conclusion. Overall, mass migration resulted in an increase in vigilante justice because the lifestyle of many people in the gold rush led to a huge increase in crime. But California was too large, sparsely populated and remote for federal law enforcement to work as it had in other areas. Because there was a lack of federal justice, people relied on vigilante justice instead. Okay, So compare that answer to the one that you've just produced and estimate yourself a grade. If you want to check the grade boundaries again, you can just scan the video back a few seconds to have a look at the marking scheme. Once you're happy that you've improved your answer and you've given it a mark, you can consider this lesson over. So thanks for watching. I hope that's been helpful, and if it has, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'll speak to you again soon. Until then, good luck, and I hope you find some gold. Bye!